within the energy sector. Now, the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, GNPC, has responded to allegations made by the Africa Center for Energy Policy, ACEP. The energy think tank last week alleged that the CEO of the GNPC and the board chairperson of the company, Freddie Blay, are owners of offshore company Jubilee Holdings registered in the Cayman Islands. At a press conference hosted by policy lead at ACEP, KODZO YAOTSE, the CEO of the GNPC, Dr. KODZO YAOTSE, was alleged to be holding shares in Jubilee Holdings and therefore was able to divert the 7% on the Jubilee and 10 fields to his company instead of GNPC's exploratory wing, Poku. Well, these were among several allegations made at the press conference. Let's have excerpts of that press conference now.
And the interesting point about holding the 7% interest in a tax haven. In the official communication to announce the acquisition of the 7% interest in Jubilee and 10, GNPC indicated that, and I quote, the interest acquired will be transferred to GNPC's subsidiary, the GNPC Exploration and Production Company, GNPC Poku. With this acquisition, GNPC Poku will become part of the contractor group for the two blocks, together with Tullow, Petro SA, and Cosmos Energy, unquote. However, ACEP can confirm that the corporation is not assigning the interest to Poku. GNPC, at the time of communicating to the public, knew that its intention was to assign the interest to a company called Jubilee Oil Holdings Limited, registered in the Cayman Islands with Dr. KK Sapon and Mr. Freddie Blay as directors. ACEP's search has not yet ascertained the beneficial owners of Jubilee Oil Holdings. It is important to note that the representation of the CEO and board chair of GNPC with their names in the General Registry of Cayman Islands is not enough proof that GNPC is the owner of Jubilee Oil Holdings. However, in the absence of evidence on shareholders of Jubilee Oil Holdings, we proceed with the assumption that GNPC owns the company. While the corporation has not provided public information on the strategic essence of this approach, the unofficial explanation received by ACEP indicates that the corporation intends to use the offshore company to pay off the loans for the acquisition before the interest reverts to Poku. This is to avert disbursement uncertainties from the Finance Ministry in compliance with the PRMA. In other words, GNPC cannot trust the Ministry of Finance to make available part of the proceeds from the additional 7% interest to amortize the loan. This has created a situation where the corporation wants to live unto itself, not the law and the nation's strategy for its existence, by avoiding the Ministry of Finance and the PRMA. Paradoxically, the Ministry of Finance, which is supposed to be the defender of the PRMA, is an active participant in the ongoing process. It is also intriguing why GNPC has instead decided to create a subsidiary in a tax haven, even if it needed a new subsidiary. Companies hide in tax havens for two popular reasons: secrecy and tax avoidance. At this point, it will be interesting to know which of the two motivates GNPC.
And so those were some excerpts of that press conference. And well, so the organization at the center of the controversy, the GNPC, has also reacted to the assertions by ACEP. As part of its responses, the GNPC says it is currently in the process of transferring the Jubilee Oil Holdings Limited to GNPC's ex-loco, and that it was never a ploy by the corporation to live unto itself, not the law and the nation's strategy for its existence, as claimed by ACEP. We want to take a deeper look into the emerging issues, and to help me do the discussions are some key stakeholders in this area. First is the policy lead for the Petroleum and Conventional Energy at ACEP, Justice KODZO YAOTSE. He is the convener of that press conference that was held last week. We also have privilege to have on board the Honorable Deputy Minister of Energy, Andrew Egyapa Mercer. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Energy 101.
Good evening, and thank you for having us.
Right, it's also good you're on board, and we'll be seeing whether we can bring on board energy expert Kwadwo Poku somewhere along the line. But I want to start with you first, Kwadwo Yaotse. I believe these assertions border around beneficial ownership. And even though you are not ascertaining beneficial ownership under the circumstance, can you briefly take us through these concepts of beneficial ownership?
I think, first of all, before I make any comment, let me correct the news that you just read. The voice that was played is my voice, but the heading that you gave to the news doesn't represent what was played in the voice. Nowhere in our statement have we said that the CEO of GNPC has acquired interest in the 7% interest. So let me make that correction. Now, to the concept of beneficial ownership is just tracing to know who actually benefits from a company. For a company that is operating, who are the real owners of the company, because there are instances where there is a company that is owned by another company who is also owned by another company, and then you have to trace to who is the final beneficiary of the interests of that company. So in essence, that is what beneficial ownership is.
Now, so if you're saying that the individuals you mentioned have not been mentioned by you as, owners or beneficial owners of this company, is it not indirectly assigned to them if you are saying that at the general registry, the GNPC's bosses, their names are penned in the general registry of the Cayman Islands as directors?
Yeah, but directors are not owners of a company. I mean, in corporate governance, any company that is registered, even in Ghana, you have to provide directors of the company, people that you can always refer to as leading the company. Yeah. So that is different from saying that someone is a beneficial. The beneficial owners is people who benefit directly, who are the final and eventual owners of whatever business that the company is making. So in this case, we only stated that we saw that these two persons have been made directors of the company. And in the statement also, we indicated that we could not ascertain the beneficial ownership of the company. And that is as far as our statement goes.
All right. So what exactly is the bone of contention here? I mean, at the press conference, what did you seek to achieve?
I mean, we raised two issues. Basically, the first one has to do with the financing the acquisition. Let me state that we are not against the GNPC acquiring 7%, additional 7% in the Jubilee and 10 oil fields, because these fields are already producing fields and they provide opportunities for immediate cash returns on the investment. But we maintain that if we are going to do that, then we have to do it properly. We shouldn't make the end justify the means. The means should also be proper and follow all the legal provisions that we have concerning petroleum activities in the country. So the first issue that we raised was about the financing of the acquisition. We stated that, I mean, based on the industry intelligence that we gathered, the finance ministry was loaning the amount to GNPC to be able to finance the acquisition. And we thought that, I mean, that was not proper because the source of the amount we couldn't tell. I mean, the Ministry of Finance has not told us how it's financed that. And then also the second issue that we raised was about the holding of the interest. That interest belongs to the state and it is vested in GNPC. But we find that now the interest is being held by a company registered offshore Ghana in the Cayman Islands, which is actually a tax haven. And I mean, the interest belongs to Ghanaians. So it is rather puzzling that for an entity, GNPC, that is owned by Ghanaians, you want to do business, then you go register in a tax haven when continentally there have been efforts to work against illicit financial flow, base erosion of profit and all of those things. It sends the wrong signal to even participants in the upstream sector about how to conduct businesses. If the state itself is engaged in such practice, how do we monitor all other companies that are participating in the sector? So those are the two key areas of contention that we.
Now, Mr. Yaotse, like you rightly said, GNPC is holding in trust, these resources for the state, and so as it were, if it manages or it decides to, invest elsewhere in the process of managing the resources, would it be, untoward in any way?
In this case, it is not investing. It's actually entrusting the interests of Ghanaians to a foreign company that we don't know, that is alien to us. So that it's not like the company is an SPV. This is Ghanaian interest that it is divesting to some other company that is alien to us. So the two cases are different. We would expect that the asset is in Ghana, so whichever company that is going to manage it should also be in Ghana. We don't understand because, like our statement read, there are only two reasons why a business will open in a tax haven. One for secrecy, and also the second to evade taxes. We currently don't know which of the two motivates.
But you are suspicious, one of them, right?
We don't know. So they have to come and tell us which of them. What we want to know, what was the thinking behind GNPC going to register a company in a tax haven when the asset is here, all the business that is done is also here. Cosmos also bought interest, but it was bought by Cosmos Ghana. So do we necessarily, what was the thinking behind it? I think that's the big question that has to be answered.
Right. All right, let me bring on board the Honorable Deputy Minister for Energy, Egyapa, Mercer. Honorable, I believe you've been listening to Mr. Yaotse.
Yes, indeed. I have been listening to him. And initially, I was under the impression that he was going to walk back their initial position because clearly, if you look at the statement that was issued by GNPC, I believe, over the weekend, many of the assertions that were made was clearly not borne out. When I saw the initial press conference from ACEP, I was surprised because we as a ministry keep an open door policy and we are always in.
Hello? Well, it looks like we're having connectivity.
Hello?
All right. So, you're back.
And so I was under the impression that for once, ACEP was acting as a media house, quick to be the first to break some news, because really the talk was about GNPC seeking to assign interest to a company registered in a tax haven. GNPC, in the first place, was not the entity that incorporated Jubilee Oil Holdings. And their statement that was issued clearly addresses that. At the time that Anadako, or Oxy sought to sell its interest in Anadako, they sought consent from the ministry in accordance with the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act. GNPC then decided, together with the ministry, to acquire a portion of that stake. Now, Anadako and Cosmos's transaction couldn't wait for the internal processes of Ghana to be completed. And so, in order to facilitate the transaction between Cosmos and Oxy on the sale of Anadako, Anadako decided to incorporate Jubilee Oil Holdings to keep that 7% that government of Ghana and GNPC have negotiated in that vehicle, so that when the processes that required approvals in Ghana were concluded, those shares could be transferred to GNPC. So it was only
it's a fact that the JOHL belongs to the GNPC or belongs to the state, right?
Well, as of now, it belongs to Ghana.
And why was, if a Ghanaian, if even it belongs to Ghana, why was it incorporated in the Cayman Islands? Any reason for that?
But of course, the owners of the shares at the time, okay, which is Oxy and Adako, were the ones who incorporated Jubilee Oil Holdings to ring fence those 7% shares, so that the remaining shares could be offloaded to Cosmos. Okay.
Okay.
This is basic transaction structure. And so if GNPC is then in a position to acquire after it had obtained its internal approvals and, of course, made available the consideration for those shares, it is that entity that had been carved out that it could acquire.
Mr. Mercer, are you or were you not as a ministry concerned in any way? I mean, when this transaction or when this special vehicle was being incorporated, especially when they have been
not at all, because there was absolutely nothing untoward about it. In any event, nobody could cause another Oxy to necessarily incorporate a company in Ghana. Bear in mind that this was a transaction that was under negotiation. They needed to ensure that they protect their interests. And so the jurisdiction that they were comfortable with, okay, in incorporating the vehicle that would hold the 7% shares that they had committed to offload to GNPC was the Cayman Islands. You see, yes, people use tax havens for all sorts of things.
Right.
But the impression that is created out there that if you incorporate a company in any tax haven, that in itself is intended to further some criminal purpose is misconstrued, because we deal with several companies here in Ghana, including Vodafone, okay?
Right.
Including mining companies that are incorporated in tax havens. The name, as it suggests, people manage their tax affairs in all sorts of manners that then enables them pay minimal taxes. And so to suggest that by reason of the fact that Anadako and Oxy opted to incorporate a company in the Cayman Islands in itself means that GNPC was the brainchild, or that GNPC had incorporated a company in the Cayman Islands. Clearly from their own statement that was issued, that is not the case. That is not what transpired.
Now, for the fact that the GNPC, did not communicate how it intended to finance the $199 million acquisition, led to some speculations that, according to ACEP. What's your take on that?
There was absolutely no basis for any speculation, because, like he himself rightfully said, GNPC is 100% owned by the government and people of Ghana. And so if GNPC was going to do an acquisition, okay, that necessarily ought to involve government taking a decision, okay? And what they then made representations to the Ministry of Finance was for the Ministry of Finance, because of the timing that was involved, to lend them that 199 million, indeed 165, I believe, because there were some discounts and some payments and some receipts that Cosmos and Anadako had received, that then brought the transaction figure below the initial 199 figure. Okay. And so government then, through, I believe, cabinet, approved for Finance Ministry to unlend that sum of money to them to enable them complete the transaction. So suggestions about opacity and people seeking to, if you like, wanting to keep the transaction in some secrecy was completely unwarranted. And like I said, we as a ministry keep an open door policy. If ACEP had just picked up the phone and called and asked that, look, what is the structure of the transaction that GNPC was undertaking, all the documentation would have been made available to them to show that in the intervening period between the completion of the transaction between Anadako and Cosmos, a vehicle had been set up, owned exclusively by Anadako Oxy, for the sole purpose of ring-fencing the 7% shares that had been set aside for GNPC, so that when GNPC procures its funding and its internal approvals to then purchase, those shares can be transferred to GNPC. And that's exactly
was it compulsory? Was it compulsory at that time for them to buy these Jubilee Oil Holdings for this purpose?
Well, GNPC was buying 7% of Anadako's stake in the Jubilee and 10 fields. Anadaco had offered all its stake in the Jubilee and 10 fields to Cosmos. That was a moving transaction that needed to be completed by a certain date. And so if government took a decision that it was important to build GNPC's operatorship capacity, particularly in the light of the fact that we were working on the acre AGM acquisition, which in itself is a green field, okay? If there was a brownfield operating field that had become available, and if you listen to all the stakeholders, including ACEP themselves, they are all in agreement that it was good that Ghana government elected to increase its stake in both Jubilee and 10, okay? But I'm saying that for purposes of achieving the transaction purpose, okay, and not to stall the original transaction that had been contemplated or that had come up for approval by the Ministry of Energy regarding the sale of the Anadaco shares from Oxy to Cosmos, it was important that that vehicle, which was proposed by the sellers themselves, as a means of ring fencing that 7% out of the, I believe, 35 or so percent shares that have been tabled on offer to Cosmos, so that when GNPC was ready with its funding, then that share can be transferred to GNPC, can take place. That was a regular transaction that any lawyer who is familiar with issues of this nature would appreciate and would not find anything untoward at all about the transaction, as is the case that ACEP sought to portray. And I thought that it was unfortunate that they are taking not having gone to the key stakeholders in the transaction to solicit appropriate information regarding the nature of the transaction to enable them brief themselves appropriately.
Well, Mr. Yaotse, I believe you've been listening carefully, and from the explanation that the minister, deputy minister, is giving, it seemed to me like it's a normal transactional, process, international business transactional process. What do you think about it?
Emmanuel, I think I like the question that you asked the Honorable Minister, whether it was compulsory for them to go acquire the Jubilee Oil Holdings. I mean, one would ask that, granted that that company was set up by Anadaco to ring fence those interests while GNPC sorts itself out. Why not just go for the interest? Why go for the company? And it's been 3 months now, and the company is still there holding our interest. Those are key questions that I think the minister failed to answer in his response to that question. So then we begin to ask, it's being portrayed as if this is just a normal transaction. Meanwhile, it could have been done better. If you said that company...
A better way would be what?
A better way would be go and get the interest, not the company.
But that's exactly what has been done.
No, that is not what has been done. But you have gone for Jubilee Oil Holding. Currently, as we speak, that interest is held by Jubilee Oil Holding in the Cayman Islands. In the Cayman Islands, it is not in Ghana. And it's been 3 months now. Our interest is being held by a supposed subsidiary of GNPC in the Cayman Islands. Those are some of the questions that we are. What has taken so long for the interest to be diverted back?
Without due respect, and I don't mean to interject, but I think that some basic appreciation of this transaction is what, on your part, is what is informing your statements. Why do I say so? I have indicated to you that the transaction was the sale of Anadaco, Oxy's interest in Anadaco West Cape Points Limited. That transaction was originally contemplated between Anadaco, Oxy, Anadaco, and Cosmos for the entirety of that stake. GNPC and the government of Ghana decided that this was an opportunity for us to increase our stake in Jubilee 10. So we negotiate. Initially, they offered 5%. We said no. Then they went up to 7%. Then we agreed. Now, that 7% is subsumed in the entirety of the interest that Oxy had in Anadaco, of which they were offloading to Cosmos. So that 7% ought to be set aside. Now, in the period between the completion of the transaction and us Ghana paying, those shares still belong to Oxy and Adako. So they then set up a vehicle and attributed those 7% shares to it. So if you look at the post-completion transaction documentation, the shareholding in Jubilee and 10 included Cosmos, Anadako 0, Jubilee Holdings 7, GNPC it's 9 or 13 or so percent, and Petro SA. Okay, so it was upon our paying the equity amount or the consideration to Oxy and Adako that they then transferred the interest in Jubilee Holdings to GNPC. How is that difficult to understand?
Well,
I think the issues that are for Jubilee Oil Holdings holding Anadako's interest and all of those things, they are not in contention because in any case, that is what has brought.
So if that vehicle that is the shares that you are buying, what other entity can you buy?
Respectfully, Honorable. That is what has brought the price down because as at the time they were transferring the interest, then the adjustments were made to bring the acquisition price to 165. That point is not in contention. What we are asking is that why is Jubilee Oil Holdings still holding on to the interest of...
But it's not an event, it's a process.
So that 3 months, the 3 month break, Honorable...
As per the approvals that they obtained, those interests will be transferred to Exploco. As we speak, that interest is held by GNPC. What's the difficulty with that?
All right, Mr. Yaotse, what about the fact that, you think that GNPC, even though it's owning the Jubilee Oil Holdings Limited, is still not enough for the company to transact business in Ghana's oil industry without registering with the Registrar General?
I mean, like Honorable rightly said, the interests have to be in Ghana. I mean, you can't do petroleum business in Ghana when you are not here. That is why for even foreign entities, we ask them to register in Ghana. So if you are here and your interest is being held by a foreign offshore company, and you have to now come and register again, I mean, that would be puts a lot of questions on our local content regulations and all of that. But I think I want to come to the financing bit. The Honorable Minister mentioned that GNPC came to the Ministry of Finance to talk to them about the acquisition, and they decided to loan the money to them. We are reliably informed that that money is the tax credits that is due the state from the sale transaction. And that money is petroleum revenues, which the PRMA states expressly in Section 6E as petroleum receipts and should go into the Petroleum Holding Fund. That has not been done. Again, Section 5.1 of the PRMA prohibits the use of petroleum receipts due the PHF for credits to the state agencies, to any entity. So I want the minister to clarify for us why both the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Energy decided deliberately to breach the provisions of the PRMA.
My simple answer to Kwadwo is this, that if he thinks as a civil society organization that some law has been breached, he knows the right thing to do. Okay? From where I sit, that no law has been breached. In any event, if you say that some funds were, because they were petroleum funds, ought to have been posted into the petroleum holding funds, what evidence do you have that those transactions have not been posted?
No, but Honorable, petroleum funds, there is a whole accountability mechanism.
I don't have a problem. I'm saying to you.
Well, so, Mr. Mercer,
those funds,
Mr. Mercer,
okay.
For the sake of hindsight, is this transaction complying with the Act 919, portions of Act 919? Are we in compliance with it? And which aspects of it is that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question at all that this transaction is in compliance with the requisite laws of our country, okay? I'm saying that the Ministry of Finance, which is the custodian of all public funds, if it has resources to make available to Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, a wholly owned statute creature of the Republic of Ghana, does it matter where it gets the money from? In any event, any postings to the Petroleum Holding Funds ought to necessarily, if you think that they've been breached, ought to be necessarily be supported by proof. I'm saying that as a republic, we do not have sufficient enough funds to make available to an entity that is owned by the Republic of Ghana to make an acquisition that we all consider as important. Is that a suggestion?
Honorable, yes, it matters where the money comes from. Because it is because of some of these things that the PRMA was instituted to be able to ring-fence some of this. Because in the period that this transaction was made, there were two budgets, the 2021 media budget and the 2022 budget were presented to Parliament. Nowhere
so
in
the Ministry of Finance hasn't got a contingency vote.
All right, gentlemen, I want to bring on board.
The Ministry of Finance hasn't got a contingency vote.
Gentlemen, and
any allocation for this.
All right, so
I'm asking whether the Ministry of Finance hasn't got a contingency vote.
All right, so I'll come back to you, but gentlemen, you are still listening to Energy 101 live on Asaase Radio 99.5. I want to bring on board energy expert Kwadwo Poku, who has also been listening to the conversation. He joins us via telephone. Good evening, Kwadwo.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you too?
I'm very well. I know there are two gentlemen talking, but I don't know who is who and who's on the line.
Right. So we have the Honorable Deputy Minister of Energy, Egyapa Mercer, and also we have KODZO YAOTSE. He is a policy lead at the Africa Center for Energy Policy. He actually convened that press conference last week, challenging the GNPC's stance in this opposition. Now,
good evening, guys.
Good evening. So, what's your take on this?
What's my take on?
The ongoing discussion. The Ghana National Petroleum Corporation has been reacting to some assertions by ACEP.
It boils down to when GNPC feels like we don't deserve to have all the information. So it's not for, like I have said on various platforms, it's not like somebody is trying to steal 7% of Ghana's shares or somebody is trying to do something untoward. It's just a culture that has been caught up with us when we do not give full disclosure of things that happen in state-owned enterprises. You clearly remember the statement put out by GNPC's Dr. KK Sapon said that the 7% acquired was being acquired for Exploco. And Exploco will be the one who's taking that, the 7%. And he even went on to say that it is part of the GNPC strategy, the same thing they want to do for our air and stuff like that. Only for us to find out that that 7% is not going to be held by Exploco, because by even the statement put out by GNPC to rebuff what he said, they put Exploco for Jubilee Holdings. Now, the reason they did that is that it's very difficult when you have taken a certain share percentage offshore in a certain jurisdiction to bring it into the local shores to as an institution or as a company. It's very complicated. So for me, I don't know why GM did not just let Cosmos deal with Occidental. And after Cosmos had acquired the shares of Occidental, then in Ghana, Cosmos just transferred 7% to Exploco in Ghana. The explanation that 7% was put aside in the initial discussion between the partners, Occidental and Cosmos. Then later, that Jubilee Holding was now transferred to ownership of GNPC. It's cumbersome.
Well, the deputy minister has explained that was done to ring fence, that transaction, and so
there was no
nothing
need. Ring fence. What are you ring fencing? Bear in mind, GNPC is represent government. Those two Look, to give GNPC 7% was a proposal from Cosmos. They, as part of the deal that they were presenting to buy the shares, because Ghana government had GNPC could have, if we had money, we could have exercised that right to buy the shares. Now, in Cosmos, basically getting government to approve that deal for them offered us the 7%. So there was no need to ring-fence it because it's something that was being given to us. So when Occidental and Cosmos were doing that transaction, both parties agreed that they would give GNPC 7%, which we had to pay for with the obligation, the tax obligation which existed between Occidental with the inheritance from Anadaku, which is a 199 million, which was later reduced to 155 million dollars. But the point we are making is that GNPC could have stayed out. Let Cosmos take that share, buy that share from Occidental in the Cayman. Now, after they have taken over the Anadaku WCPP in Ghana, then they transfer 5% of the Jubilee shares to GNPC. There was no need for us to go and take 7% in the Cayman. Now, how do you get that 7% to your shore? What you need to do is now have an offshore company called Jubilee Holdings to come and incorporate the company in Ghana, owned by the entity called Jubilee Holdings in the Cayman, with the 100% shareholder of another company called Jubilee Holdings. So that thing takes the whole thing out from S-Local. I don't see how S-Local now can pay. So the whole thing is that it's cumbersome. There were easier way of doing it, and the full disclosure, if they have told Ghanaians that, look, this is how we intend to do it, people will have to go. But this is the wrong way of doing this transition. Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poku. Now, so Mr. Yaotse, are you satisfied now with GNPC's explanation that it was in the process of transferring the JOHL to GNPC Exploco?
To respond before my other colleague from civil society comes in.
Yes, I'll give you that chance. I just want to find out from him what you think about that response.
Can the question again?
Yes, I'm saying that are you not satisfied with the explanation by GNPC that it is in the process of transferring the JOHL to GNPC Exploco?
If it is doing that, then it should do that quickly. It should give us timelines that it intends to do that so that we can monitor the process. Because the news cycle in Ghana is such that if that is not done, then everybody goes to sleep. And 1 year, 2 years down the line, our interest is still being held in the Cayman Islands.
So your problem is that the communication was not forthcoming. Communication of all these transactions, wasn't too clear from the GNPC until now, right?
Our point, first of all, is that yes, communication was not forthcoming, and second, this thing shouldn't happen.
Okay.
It shouldn't happen. We've been trying very hard across the continent to, like I said earlier, work against illicit financial flows, especially in the extractive sector. And Ghana cannot be seen as a poster boy of going to do business in offshore locations and also taking us back on decades of progress that we've made on ensuring transparency in the extractive sector.
All right. Mr. Mercer, do you also share the same view about, communication and transparency in oil and gas transactions?
I don't at all, because like I said, we as a ministry, at least from the period that my minister and I have been there, consistently kept an open door policy with all our civil society actors within the energy space. You see, the talk that I hear is that why do you keep interest in Cayman? As if to say, shares are some tangible commodity that is sitting in the Cayman Islands. Okay.
But Mr. Mercer, if you didn't explain, that's what people will, take it. Because you don't come out to say.
That's why I said that for a respectable institution, at least in my view, such as ACEP, I would have thought that if there was some misapprehension or misunderstanding of a particular transaction, the only way to resolve that is to make inquiry. Because thankfully I'm a lawyer and I have done transactions for at least 14, 15 years. And obviously, it cannot be the case that when the ministerial authority that is exercised in a certain direction, giving approval for a certain interest to be acquired for a subsidiary of GNPC, can be overlooked. And I keep on saying, and to the point of sounding repetitive, Jubilee Oil Holdings, in the nature of the transaction and the timing that we're talking about, was a necessary introduction to save.
Hello?
Well, entailed through GNPC. There's no doubt in my mind at all. Because bear in mind that unless, of course, you are not familiar with the timing and when even the first request for consent from the Ministry of Energy from Cosmos and Adako came to the ministry, it came as far back as July of 2021. As of October, we're working on this transaction.
And you would agree with me that before, I mean, like from the time period that you're talking about, we've been adequately been informed by the GNPC about the transactions. So why not this one? I mean, what's stopping them, or what stopped them from?
But of course, like I was saying, this transaction was essentially moving parts. Indeed, the request for consent came before the decision, to acquire ACA and AGM. But ACA and AGM, of course, they had started earlier in the discussions. GNPC expressing interest and having some experts appointed from both sides to begin some preliminary work. Right. I'm saying that when the request for the consent came in July, government of Ghana had no inkling of acquiring any stake in Jubilee and TED.
Right.
But at the point where we got to, we came to the realization that, look, if we are interested in buying a stake in the Greenfield AGM ACA, and this opportunity has arisen, it was important for us to put our best foot forward and do the acquisition, which has the support of at least all civil society organizations who have made comments on this transaction. Because it's a good transaction.
We don't have much time now.
To hold the shares amounts to some secrets.
Mr. Mercer, Poku wants to ask you one final question. Could you make it quick?
Let me ask Mr. Mercer a question.
Real snappy.
At what point did anybody inform the public that there was a company called Jubilee Holdings taking the 7% until ACEP brought it out? Has anybody informed the public about Jubilee Holdings?
I do not recall, but I'm saying that these transactions, indeed, I saw Jubilee Holdings for the first time between the period that the ministry granted consent. And if I wasn't on my phone, I would have put an email, which email I believe correspondence was in the region of, I believe, 15th or so October. It was post that, and all the meetings that were held with Anadako lawyers and all that, Jubilee Holdings had not been introduced because we were all under the impression that the completion of the transfer of the 7%, that Ghana was acquiring, and the transfer of the remaining to Cosmos was going to take place at the same time.
Right. Thank you very much.
Because we don't
have much time.
Give me a second. I'll just find out. If the completion of all these 3 transactions or 2 transactions was taking place at the same time, then the introduction of a vehicle to hold the shares would have become unnecessary. But here is the case. Cosmos and Adadako had a certain timeline to complete. At that time, Ghana was not ready. So in order not to stop the transaction, it was important for them to put that 7% in a vehicle that they were comfortable with until such time that Ghana was ready to acquire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer. Mr. Kwadwo Yaotse, your final word before we wrap up. Your final word, Mr. Kwadwo Yaotse.
Say that again.
Hello, Mr. Kwadwo Yaotse.
We have laws in this country that's enacted to safeguard our petroleum revenues. I think if we want to do however justify the actors, we should follow the law that has been set to ensure that the revenues are used in an effective manner.
All right.
Again, we want the interest to come back to Ghana, and it should come immediately.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been very good and nice talking to you all. And my guests tonight have been the Deputy Minister for Energy, Mr. Andrew Egyapa Mercer. KODZO YAOTSE is the policy lead at ACEP, and also energy expert, energy expert Kwadwo Poku. My name is Emmanuel Aboagye-Wiafe. This is where we draw the curtains down on Energy 101. Thank you very much for your time. Let's meet again same time next week for more interesting developments in the world of energy.